Hello, my name is Andrew Brooks. This is another non-linear existential presentation entitled Responsibility Feedback Loops and Governing Systems. The title is also The Importance of a Functioning Positive Negative Feedback Loop in a Governing System. Here's a table of contents. The basic idea is that I'm going to be bringing a statement concerning responsibility, define responsibility, and show the implication for non-linear existentialism. Basically, the idea is showing that with non-linear existentialism being expression of a theoretical feedback loop, negative and positive, and how lack of responsibility or individual being or society being responsible, that this curtails the functioning of the feedback loop and can lead to problems and situations that are negative for the individual as well as society in which the person lives. So a statement concerning responsibility. One of the worst tribulations that can befall a person or society is for either not to be responsible for their actions or inactions. This is a concept, but also the thing is that if you take, I'm going to try to show how responsibility, how it forms within the substance of non-linear existentialism, and how through that not being responsible can lead to dysfunctionality. First, I got to define responsibility. Experiencing the untempered and sometimes painful effects of one's actions, thereby allowing the individual with such experiences to first consider the experiences and then react to it in a manner which may cause them to attempt to maintain standards of the governing system. It's a little pedantic, but I think it's necessary to show that responsibility is a person feeling pain, feeling the results, good or bad, mostly bad, of what they've done, and that's part of learning, is interacting with the environment and learning, good or bad, the reactions or the response of the environment to what they've done. Implications for non-linear existentialism. Whether being a means for a person to experience a sufficient, that's important, sufficient level of responsibility, it will interfere with a positive negative feedback loop that modulates cerebral resistance, causing not only the person to be in a non-optimal state, but also society and or governing system in which they live. So again, getting to the heart of the matter, that we can see that responsibility is a very important aspect for the feedback loop to work correctly. And what it does is basically modulates the cerebral resistance. Relationship between standards and residual incongruencies, RI. As was noted a number of times throughout the series of presentations, the meaning of life, put bluntly, is having residual incongruencies equal to zero. So with that idea, external standards can cause residual incongruencies, especially if they reduce the immediate satisfactions of needs and wants. However, if the external standards are perceived as fair and are constantly and consistently applied to society, then the external standard can become internalized and reduce residual incongruency. As I was showing beforehand, the self-lying function will begin because there's going to be a separation of the individual from the environment, and that's just a natural effect of the interference that's created through the theoretical matrix of the non-linear existentialism that occurs. That's going to be creating residual incongruencies, interference, and it can be basically associated with certain patterns, but also it is basically an aspect of being able to differentiate oneself from the environment. That anxiety, that interference, pattern or non-pattern related, is a crucial aspect of one's existence. Feedback loop, positive or negative. You have a set point, you can have a number of set points. The positive, as we know for feedback loops, is that it goes away from a set point. It goes either higher or lower. And for negative, it tries to maintain that homeostasis. So you can have two different set points. You have input, you have integrator, and effector, output, and goal. For this one, it's going to be residual incongruency equal to zero. Negative feedback loop endeavors to maintain a set point, and as I mentioned, a positive feedback loop does not. I took this from a paper that we have up on the website for non-linear charities of life. Its implications on non-linear existentialism and Freud's psychoanalytic method. This is again just a very primitive diagram, just showing up inputs on the left. They integrate from a number of inputs, and you have a set point. The set point and the integrated input comes together and they compare, and the output basically is feedback to the input of whether or not they have met the goal, either positive or negative. If it has maintained it, then the feedback will not require any more input or to modulate the input, and also at the same time that there's going to be feedback to other parts of the system. So this one is the classic temperature for anything for negative feedback loops, and for positive is going to be anything that just allows the system to go further and further away from the original homeostatic baseline point, and that is going to be a very unstable system. So nonlinear existentialism has positive and negative feedback components. You have a set point, negative temperature, water, food. That's going to be the basic homeostatic mechanism, and a positive is going to be basically the idea of the primary needs baseline activity level. I've postulated it's in the hippocampus. We won't go into too much detail here, but again, the exact whereabouts of these individual components is important, but it would be a little bit too weighty to consider right now. But again, it's just going to be the idea that you're going to be having different set points. And for, it's kind of interesting here, the positive feedback loop of PFL, as was being stated before in other presentations, that we want to have positive, and that would seem to make the system be unstable if you have the baseline, which constitutes the positive feedback loop, upon which a negative feedback loop works over. You would think that caused the system to be very unstable, but as mentioned before, the inherent aspect of being conscious, sentient, is separating oneself from the environment, and that, I believe, is a function of interference. And that interference creates residual incongruencies. It's a cerebral interference, resistance. And so with that it's because it's always there, the system always has to accentuate the positive. So this is just showing the very basic diagram. You have the maximum at the very top, and then the primary needs baseline activity level. This is something that constitutes what the best is, what the system wants to strive towards. And I just have on the left-hand side that we have something that passes the primary needs baseline activity level, and it would continue on towards the maximum if it could. However, the resistance, which is causing the residual incongruencies, is causing the line to go further. This is neuronal energy, the energetics, as it's going lower, and that's an aspect of the residual incongruencies occurring within a system. And hopefully also this is going to be very strongly related to the idea of responsibility. So that flash that we have that goes up towards the primary needs baseline activity level, it's going over there, but it doesn't continue on further because the standards impressed upon the person through responsibility has caused the system to be aware that going further to the point of the maximum would not be beneficial for the system. And this is the comparison. This is without responsibility. Before with responsibility, this is without responsibility. And you can see the number of times that it hits the maximum. And this is a maximum the system can sustain at any amount of any point. And this can be quite detrimental if it's hit a number of times or reached a number of times. So the thing is, even though the system, this is a reflection, the individual is very close to primary needs baseline activity level, but because the line wasn't allowed to go down, wasn't allowed to arc downwards and arc back upwards, integrating the residual incongruencies and trying to fight it in this case, the system becomes more and more unstable. As you can see, as you go further along, the pencil marks around the black line going downwards are getting more and more erratic, and that causes the system to become unstable. So this is something very important, that yes, at the beginning, that without responsibility, the person that would be a reflection of this would be closer to primary needs baseline activity level, but it would be artificial, and they haven't integrated responsibility. So comparison that occurs by fostering and developing sufficient and reasonable levels, and this is important again, reasonable levels of residual incongruencies, the curvature and degree of fluctuations and development of neuronal energy in their cerebral cortex is maintained within a stable condition, which may lead to an optimization of the energetics, i.e. reaching the primary needs baseline activity level, and hopefully reaching the residual incongruencies level of 0. Again, this is different from instantaneous incongruencies, which are going to happen all the time. Residual incongruencies are going to be resistance that's built into the system, and it isn't. In this one, is that you're not getting rid of that as the system goes back up towards a primary needs baseline activity level. It's just that now those patterns that was originally seen as being foreign and against the, I guess, self-centered patterns that were brought about in the youth, that over a period of time they get more and more integrated, and they're no longer seen as residual incongruencies, seen as a negative resistance. Resistance is a necessary thing, that if you do not have resistance, then the patterns wouldn't know when something should or should not be occurring, where there might be something defaulted to not doing it because it might curve the overall energetics of the system. So even though the curve is going down and curve is going back up, and the energetics is improving, that does not mean in any way that the system has no resistance whatsoever. Just if that resistance is creating residual incongruencies. So, comparison governing systems. I think this is rather important, that you have three types of governing systems. A is the one that is responsibility. B is going to be the one that, for some sectors of the individuals within that governing system, whatever you want to call it, that it doesn't build in the residual incongruencies, and that causes the system to be unstable and it will fall. And then further down at the very bottom, when you have too much residual incongruencies, what happens is it suppresses the system very low. So yes, you have the idea of stability, but the individual is allowed to nurture, develop for themselves. So ultimately, they can never reach the primary needs baseline activity level. They could be happy, but the thing is, it'll be a reflection of the governing system, not of their own selves. So ideal governing system, line A, as I mentioned, depicts a governing system that bases laws, rules, and its own actions on ensuring those within the society experience the necessary levels of responsibility. Residual incongruencies. It's very important for people to experience the results of what they've done. And yes, there's a lot of governing systems that promise many things, that kind of insinuates that we will be there to remove that from you. But the thing is, I think a proper and pragmatic governing system would have to understand that the people have to experience the results of not meeting a standard. And as I was saying, residual incongruencies to maintain a balance between personal growth and the individual's adherence and acceptance of the external standards. So conclusion, in order for a society and its citizens to flourish, the individuals within the society are required to have the external standards of that society impressed upon them. Responsibility in the form of experience increase and then a decrease in residual incongruencies controls and stabilizes the amount of neuronal energy in the cerebral cortex. Without adequate levels of responsibility, the feedback loop cannot function properly, leading to the failure of the person and society. This is a mechanism, and yes, when fleshed out further, it becomes the sophisticated thing that we know as a human being within a society with all the capabilities, good and bad. However, it is a feedback mechanism, positive and negative. If we just treat it as a negative feedback system, then one would ask, how does it flourish? How does it grow? How does it change? So that's very important to have positive and negative. But with a positive, the thing is that it's always going to go towards the highest amount of energy that it can reach. It's open that way just because there's a natural residual incongruencies that are a natural result of the interference that's created by letter B1B of the cerebral matrix, that we have the FAM, frequency amplitude modulation, that it's a natural system. So yes, it positively wants to go to the highest level of energy beyond the primary needs baseline activity level, which is the highest maintained level that it can have. It will want to go to maximum. But the thing is that with the residual incongruencies, which is a natural output of the system, a natural occurrence of the system, that doesn't. But when you have governing systems that try to circumvent that for whatever reasons, it's going to circumvent the system and cause it to fail. So this is my attempt at, I guess, social studies in some way. But I think again with non-linear existentialism, it should be able to talk with some amount of order and I don't know, wisdom, if I can use that term, in as many humanities as possible. So I thank you very much for your time. This is something to consider. Thank you very much. Take care.